Hello, this lecture is on the human rights rhetoric of Malala Yousafzai. I will focus on the speech she gave at the United Nations Youth Assembly on July 12, 2013. The primary topics of this speech were the right to education and women's rights. In this lecture, I will first provide biographical information, and then I will analyze Malala's 2013 speech in terms of human rights and rhetorical theory. Malala was born in Pakistan on July 12, 1997. As a human rights activist, her primary interests are in the right to education and women's rights. In 2014, Malala became the youngest person ever to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Yousafzai first came to international prominence for an online diary or blog she published for the BBC. The blog's purpose was to document life for a child living under the SWAT Taliban. Ruxana Hazib writes, "She was only 11 years old when Pakistan's Taliban overran the picturesque region and turned it into smoldering ashes in 2009. Education for girls was banned and they were ordered to quit school and stay home. To further terrorize the region, the Taliban burned down more than 400 schools. Encouraged by her father, she reached out to the world with the help of modern technology, not accessible to many girls in that region. She pounded out a detailed account of her daily struggles in her anonymous BBC blog. In this blog, she writes about her fear of acid attacks, and she worries about the safety of her family. She also recalls the night when her family awoke to the thundering of gunfire and were forced to flee their home, and she tells of the horrors of seeing headless bodies strewn in their path." Mirza Waheed, the editor of the BBC Urdu blog, explained the process of working with Malala. Malala passed on handwritten diary pages to our reporter, and he would scan and email or fax them to me. I would edit it to retain its directness, its raw texture, and at times as I edited her, I would well up. An excerpt from Yousafzai's diary. "I had a terrible dream yesterday with military helicopters and the Taliban. I have had such dreams since the launch of the military operation in SWAT. My mother made me breakfast and I went off to school. I was afraid of going to school because the Taliban had issued an edict banning all girls from attending schools. On my way home from school, I heard a man saying, 'I will kill you.' I hastened my pace, and after a while, I looked back to see if the man was still coming from behind me. But to my utter relief, he was talking on his mobile and must have been threatening someone else over the phone." Thursday, January 15th, night filled with artillery fire. The night was filled with the noise of artillery fire, and I woke up 3 times. But since there was no school, I got up later at 10 a.m. Afterwards, my friend came over, and we discussed our homework. Today, it is January 15th, the last day before the Taliban's edict comes into effect. And my friend was discussing homework as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Today, I also read the diary entry I had written for the BBC in Urdu and published in the newspaper. My mother liked my pen name, Gul Maki, and said to my father, "Why not change her name?" I also liked the name because my real name means grief-stricken. My father said that some days ago someone brought the printout of this diary saying how wonderful it was. My father said that he smiled but could not even say that it was written by his own daughter. As mentioned in the previous video, Malala was attacked by a member of the Taliban and nearly died. On October 9, 2012, a Taliban gunman targeted and shot Malala as she rode home on a bus in Pakistan's Swat Valley.
When I read Malala's diaries for the first time, it was quite obvious that she had something to say. Language was very simple, which made her narrative even more powerful. And of course, at that time, she was only 12 years old, so she had the innocence of a child, but still, she was very, very passionate and committed to education. And it was amazing the way she talked about her own fears and those of her friends. Of course, we kept Malala's identity secret in order to protect her, because everything that we put up on the BBC Urdu page is often immediately picked up by the local media. And there was a particular interest in her diaries because she was the only voice coming out of Swat, and there was no other way of finding out what was going on in the valley. Then once the government had pushed Taliban out of Swat, Malala's family decided to go public with her identity, and from there on she campaigned publicly for education, and she was quite a well-known figure inside the country by the time she was attacked. Oh, I still remember that day when I walked into the section. The news had come in by that time, and everybody was very quiet. I could see the sense of shock. It was almost a kind of a sense of despair that I saw in the office, and that was actually a history-making moment, because that was the time when she became known all over the world. Well, I think as a person, she's an exceptionally brave person. But she's not just a person. She is a symbol. She's a symbol of hope for tens of millions of girls in Pakistan who are as committed to education as Malala is, but they fear for their future because of a lack of opportunity at times, because of the inherent conservatism of the Pakistani society. It's these millions of girls that Malala represents, and which is why it's such a proud day for Pakistan, where all those girls that are not known to the world, and their number runs into millions, they look at her, they listen to her, and in her, they...
The bullet entered her head on the side of her left eye and traveled through her neck and ended up in her shoulder. I spoke out publicly on behalf of girls and our right to learn, and this made me a target. In October 2012, on my way home from school, a masked gunman boarded my school bus and asked, "Who is Malala?" He shot me on the left side of my head. I woke up 10 days later in a hospital in Birmingham, England. Doctors and nurses told me about the attack and that people around the world were praying for my recovery. Less than a year later, Malala would deliver the keynote speech at the UN Youth Assembly in New York City. This event brought together young leaders from 100 countries to the UN in New York. The speech was given on her 16th birthday, July 12, 2013, and for this assembly, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon named July 12th Malala Day. Early in the speech, Malala elaborates on the power of language to defend rights and to secure peace. This passage reflects many human rights values. She appeals to a sense of sisterhood and brotherhood. She explains how she uses nonviolent methods to fight for justice, and she references universal values and experiences that unite us all.
Dear sisters and brothers, we realize the importance of light when we see darkness. We realize the importance of our voice when we are silenced. In the same way, when we were in Swat, the north of Pakistan, we realized the importance of pens and books when we saw the guns. The wise saying, "The pen is mightier than sword," was true. The extremists were and they are afraid of books and pens. The power of education frightens them. They are afraid of women. The power of the voice of women frightens them. And that is why they killed 14 innocent students in the recent attack in Quetta. And that is why they killed female teachers and polio workers in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. That is why they're blasting schools every day, because they were and they are afraid of change, afraid of equality that we will bring into our society.
In her vision of this pursuit for justice, people around the world collaborate to protect the rights of children and to protect the rights of women. Her argument is built on the premise that every single woman in the world has a right to education, and that every single woman in the world has the right to peace and equality.
Dear brothers and sisters, do remember one thing. Malala Day is not my day. Today is the day of every woman, every boy, and every girl who have raised their voice for their rights. There are hundreds of human rights activists and social workers who are not only speaking for their rights, but who are struggling to achieve their goal of peace, education, and equality.
This human rights vision unites activists and social workers from around the world in a struggle to protect the rights of children and to protect the rights of women. And this understanding of a human family, this understanding of universal values and experiences allows Malala to say the following words. So here I stand, one girl among many. I speak not for myself, but for all girls and boys. With this collective voice, this voice representing boys and girls from around the world, Malala addresses specific human rights. The right to live in peace, the right to be treated with dignity, the right to equality of opportunity, and the right to be educated. In terms of the right to education, the stakes could not be higher for Malala. An interesting move that Malala makes is to align Islam with human rights. In her speech, Malala says that Islam defends the right to education. Quote, Islam says that it is not only each child's right to get education, rather it is their duty and responsibility. She places Islam and human rights on the same ethical plane. And in doing so, she identifies Islam as a potential source for human rights. Malala also distinguishes Islam from the Taliban. In her speech, the Taliban do not represent Islam. Rather, she does. The concept of universal human rights also represents Islam, and not the Taliban. This represents a significant contribution that Malala makes to human rights discourse. To better understand human rights values, she turns to Islam. And to better understand Islam, she turns to human rights values. In addition to addressing the right to education, Malala also addresses women's rights. She argues that the debate around women's rights should focus on agency. She wants to empower women to lead discussions.
Dear fellows, today I'm focusing on women's rights and girls' education because they're suffering the most. There was a time when women social activists asked men to stand up for their rights, but this time we will do it by ourselves.
Rather than framing herself as a victim, she positions herself as an agent, as a survivor. This perspective celebrates coalitions and alliances that prioritize experiences unique to women, presupposing that there are some experiences and or values that unite women around the world. Elaborating on the conditions necessary to secure the right for education, Malala makes a strong connection between peace and education.
Peace is necessary for education. In many parts of the world, especially Pakistan and Afghanistan, terrorism, wars, and conflicts stop children to go to their schools. We are really tired of these wars. Women and children are suffering in many ways in many parts of the world.
In this passage, war disrupts education. Violence limits the development of children. She elaborates on the interrelationship between peace and education by examining contexts outside of war. In the second half of the passage, she looks at the violence of poverty, the violence of inequality, and the violence of extremism.
In India, innocent and poor children are victims of child labor. Many schools have been destroyed in Nigeria. People in Afghanistan have been affected by the hurdles of extremism for decades. Young girls have to do domestic child labor, and are forced to get married at early age. Poverty, ignorance, injustice, racism, and the deprivation of basic rights are the main problem faced by both men and women.
Malala views human rights as interconnected. The right to work, the right to health, the right to education are connected to the right to life, liberty, and security of person, the right to legal recognition, and the right to freedom of expression. In one of the most powerful passages of the speech, Malala reflects on her experience after being shot by a member of the Taliban on a bus returning home from school. She uses her recovery as evidence of her resilience, of her will, of her focus, and by extension of her human rights framework. This narrative of survival extends to victims of human rights abuses around the world.
Dear friends, on the 9th of October 2012, the Taliban shot me on the left side of my forehead. They shot my friends too. They thought that the bullet would silence us, but they failed. And out of that silence came thousands of voices.
In just a few sentences, Malala moves from the singular to the collective. She begins with her perspective on the 9th of October, when she was shot on the left side of her forehead. Then she recognizes the experiences of her friends that were on the bus with her that day. They shot my friends too. And then she expands this struggle, the struggle for education, the struggle for life, for liberty, to include thousands of voices. Another powerful passage in the speech occurs when Malala rejects revenge as a motivating factor for her actions.
Dear sisters and brothers, I'm not against anyone. Neither am I here to speak in terms of personal revenge against the Taliban or any other terrorist group. I'm here to speak up for the right of education of every child. I want education for the sons and daughters of the Taliban and all the terrorists and extremists. I do not even hate the Talib who shot me. Even if there is a gun in my hand and he stands in front of me, I would not shoot him. This is the compassion that I have learned from Muhammad, the Prophet of Mercy, and Jesus Christ and Lord Buddha.
In this passage, Malala endorses nonviolent strategies to pursue justice. This passage also gives us a different perspective on the connections between peace and education. In a previous section, Malala elaborated on how peace can produce the necessary conditions for education. In this section, she elaborates on how education can produce the necessary conditions for peace.
This is the legacy of change that I have inherited from Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. This is the philosophy of non-violence that I have learned from Gandhiji, Bacha Khan, and Mother Teresa. And this is the forgiveness that I have learned from my father and from my mother. And this is what my soul is telling me. Be peaceful and love everyone.
In the second half of this passage, Malala aligns her struggle for human rights with human rights movements in the 20th century. She positions her values alongside the values of Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. If Malala is successful at demonstrating that she shares values with these 20th century leaders, she is likely to earn the trust of the audience. Malala offers a vision of a universal struggle that spans generations, that spans nationalities and ethnicities. King was from the United States, Mandela South Africa, and Jinnah Pakistan. And while King and Mandela were born in the 20th century, Jinnah was born in the 19th. By joining this lineage, Malala extends their legacies into the 21st century. This multi-generational history of fighting for human rights also deepens our understanding of human rights. By referencing Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Malala offers an alternative history of human rights, one that predates the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that draws from Islam and respects Pakistani cultural traditions.
We call upon our sisters around the world to be brave, to embrace the strength within themselves and realize their full potential. Dear brothers and sisters, we want schools and education for every child's bright future. We will continue our journey to our destination of peace and education. No one can stop us. We will speak up for our rights, and we will bring change through our voice. We believe